Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk today about a book that I had the pleasure of editing that came out in June called More Lies About Learning. And I'm hoping you'll find this interesting, entertaining, sometimes surprising, and maybe even a little controversial. I want to warn you that I have a little cold, so if suddenly the audio disappears, it's probably not your phone or your computer, but it's probably because I've gone to mute and I'm coughing, which I wouldn't want you to hear. So hopefully that won't happen, but I just wanted to warn you in case it does. This is a little bit about me, not that important. The big thing here is I've been doing this work for a long time, and over the course of the years I've developed lots of opinions, some of them even based on experience and knowledge of some things, but oftentimes people tell me that's not the case. You'll be the judge. This is our agenda. I want to thank the people that helped me with this book. I'll talk a little bit about the goals I was trying to achieve through the book, talk about a couple of lies, and then finish up with some suggestions, some ideas about how you can go forward with this. Feel free to enter text, or rather enter comments or chat, and I'll get the questions as I can. And with that, let's get started. So first of all, my style of writing these books is to find other people that have lots of good things to say and to collect them into a team and to build out content based on that. So before I take one step forward, I want to thank the 10 people that are listed on the screen for contributing to this project. I'm going to talk about content that 2 of them wrote, but all of them spent a great deal of time, a great deal of energy, and put a great deal of thought into thinking about lies that they encounter as they do their jobs. In ways that people can overcome them as they try to apply our craft in delivering good business solutions to their customers. So thank you, folks. Without you, there wouldn't be much here. I'm going to mute for a moment and move forward. Now, my wife often asks me, why do I subject myself to doing this kind of work? And apart from I really enjoy it, which is probably the most important part, I wrote both of these books, or I edited both of these books, because I was really frustrated when I go to conferences and listen to people stand up there, and often they were pundits, some of them were vendors, some of them were professionals, and they would just make these outrageous statements. Now, they didn't sound so outrageous at the time, but then when you began to dig around in them and you learned more about them and you found out why they made them, it became a little frustrating, and I began to keep a list. And that's what led to the first edition of this book and what sort of prompted the second edition, which is to take all the things that we hear as we go about doing our jobs, trying to deliver good value to our customers, try to make sense out of all of it. So what I'm saying is why I did this work, and it's really to achieve these 4 goals. And the last 2 are really important. In the end, all we're about is delivering more value to our customers. And one of the things that I think is really important is for us to be able to learn from each other. And by assembling the people I did to create this version of the book, this edition of the book, you're learning from some of the people that are best in the industry, that have had a great deal of experience in wrestling with the issues that we wrestle with every day. And I tried to get a way for them to take what they knew and get it into the hands of more people. You'll ultimately decide whether or not we achieve these goals, but I think we have. These are the lies that I covered this time. And what was most interesting about this particular set of chapters is that I saw this gigantic tug of war that was going on between and among the various authors. And for almost every topic I've listed here, one author viewed things that were said about it as a lie and tried to correct them, and other authors viewed them as truths and tried to promote and explain how to apply them. And I think that what that characterized was the ongoing debate in our industry about what works and what doesn't work, and how we take all the information that's out there and apply it to solve the particular problems that we're trying to solve. So I thought that the debate that went on inside of the book was really healthy and can help explain things that sometimes are difficult to understand. Now, as I thought about what to talk about in this webinar, I chose 2 particular chapters. The first was by a gentleman named Doug Lynch called Lies About Learning Research. And the second was Lies About Learning Technology by Elliot Mazie. And the reason I chose those particular chapters to focus on is because they have great generalizability to almost everything that we do. I think that research is a critical component, often overlooked component of our daily work. And we see new technologies all the time. I'll ask a question later, but I found that I've been under pressure in my career to adopt new technologies without really understanding what they are, how they work, or what value they might add. And unfortunately, too many cases I found after the fact that they didn't add much value, even though I spent a great deal of time and money trying to derive value from them. So I thought that those two would be a good place to start. So first I'm going to talk about Lies About Learning research. And as I said earlier, I chose this one because in the end, research is the basis of all good decisions, and most learning professionals make decisions every single day, many of which have fairly broad implications. So good place to start this conversation. So we're going to start with a poll question. You should see on your screen a question. Very simple question. Designing to accommodate different learning styles increases program effectiveness. So that's the question. Does designing to accommodate learning styles really make a difference? And you've got 4 choices. You think that's been proven through research. You think it makes sense. You think there's no supporting evidence. Or finally, that evidence actually refutes the statement. So everyone, please vote. The more the merrier. We're up to about 25. Keep coming in. I think that, a lot of us have dealt with this issue. We get requests about it. We have to offer opinions about it. Votes are still coming in, almost up to 60. In another moment or two, I'll show you what you all said. It's always interesting to do these polls because you get such diverse opinions, and it makes for a very interesting conversation. So I'm gonna move on and show you the results. Haven't changed much lately, but 20% of you think that's been proven through research. A substantial number of you thinks that it just makes intuitive sense, and many fewer of you think that there's not much evidence to support it. And you may be surprised by what the facts are here. So it turns out that specific evidence exists that refutes the statement. And I'll take it even further and say that there have been more than 100 peer-reviewed studies investigating this hypothesis, and they all have found no evidence of differences in how people learn. Now, let me do a little more explanation about that. What I mean by that is that these research studies have found that given different approaches to delivering content, people learned equally from all of them. It's not to say that we don't have preferences, and it's not to say that there's not value in designing to accommodate different preferences. But when someone comes to you and says, I have built this program based on a particular learning style, and it will lead to better results, more learning, research just doesn't support them. So that's just not the case. Now let's do another one. 90% of learning happens informally, which is the 70 plus 20 of the 70-20-10 rule. And so same questions for that. Proven through research, suggested through research, makes intuitive sense, or quantitative research lacking. So do you think that there's actual data that suggests that 90% of learning happens informally? So let's keep voting. About half of you have voted. Results are a little different this time, which is always good for good discussion, as I said earlier. About 80 or 90% of you, so I'm going to skip to the results. And here we see that some of you thought, that's 48%, that it's either been proven through research or suggested through research, and the rest are a little more skeptical. 31% thought it makes sense. Then 28% said that there really isn't much research behind this one. And once again, an interesting story. This idea, well, first of all, the answer to the question is no objective quantitative research exists to support the statement. Now, I was very specific when I said objective quantitative research, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. But the original idea actually emerged in the 1960s when a Canadian researcher named Alan Tuff suggested that there's a lot of things we see. Learning is kind of like an iceberg. You see things that happen above the surface, but then a lot in classes and things, but other things happen in other places. And he never attributed numbers to it. He just kind of used the iceberg as a metaphor. And over the course of time, people began to attribute percentages that he never actually provided. Now, there was some research done by the Center for Creative Leadership, but they asked a slightly different question. They just asked managers and executives this question: please identify at least 3 key events in your career, things that made a difference in the way you manage now. And they said, what happened and what did you learn from it, for better or worse? And what that got translated into was what is now the 70-20-10 rule. And it happened because this is what they found out. And according to that qualitative research, people learned 70% of what they knew from tough jobs, 20% from other people, mostly their bosses, and 10% from courses and reading. So while it was qualitative, it wasn't quantitative. They couldn't measure it to determine its actual efficacy. But if it were true, this is what it would mean. We learn through experience. We just have to go do things. And in fact, we know that while doing things is important, there's a better approach that you can take, which is to do some things, reflect on what you've done, talk with your managers, have experiences, talk with your managers, and learn from that, and then go do more. But in the end, probably this is the best approach, which is to deliver training, then go apply that training, reflect on what's working, what's not working, talk with the people around you, including your managers and your peers and your employees and other people who observed you, learn from that, and then go apply again. But what's happened in many organizations, some of which I've been a part of, this notion of the rule, 70-20-10, has gone from a general guideline about something to think about to a budgeting requirement with massive reduction in training and massive increases in this thing they call informal learning, but which people haven't really figured out a way to do and apply and measure. And so people are making all kinds of decisions based on what was largely a myth without really understanding what it meant and what to do with it. And so I asked the question, why? And I have a very simple response. And it comes from a movie from 1962 called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And there a reporter told someone that when the legend becomes the fact, print or act on, I added the parens, the legend. When the legend becomes the fact, print or act on the legend. Now I have to credit this phrase to a comedian named Robert Wool, who does a show called Assume the Position, and in it he talks about all of the myths that have plagued us through history, and I'll give you an example of one of them. So, on or about April 13th, 1775, this gentleman, who shall go nameless, rode a horse from Watertown, Massachusetts to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is a distance of about 350 miles. It took him a little over 4 days, announcing that the British had arrived and the Revolutionary War was about to start. So pretty big effort to do that. 3 days later, this guy rode from Charlestown, Massachusetts to Lexington, Massachusetts, a whopping 12 miles on a good day, to do the same thing, basically. So one guy rides halfway down the east coast of the U.S., and another guy rides from one town in Massachusetts to another town in Massachusetts. And the one we know about is this guy. Listen, my children, and ye shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Now, he's the one who rode 12 miles. And why did that happen? Why did he get so famous because of this? And the answer is that in the 1860s, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem about him. And so generations of children believe that Paul Revere was the one who really communicated the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Well, in fact, there was another guy, Israel Bissell, who was the one who wrote from Boston to Philadelphia. But he wasn't so poetic. Listen, my children, to my epistle of the long ride of Israel Bissell. It just didn't work. That poem was written in the mid-1900s by a guy who felt bad because Israel Bissell didn't get any of the credit he deserved for really announcing to the country that the Revolutionary War was starting. But the legend would have you believe that Paul Revere was the one who really made that announcement. And so that same concept, these notions of legends, when the legends are better than the facts go with the legends, designing to accommodate different learning styles was one example. Another one, 90% of learning happens informally. We act every day on those things even though the actual facts don't support what we do. And so my question now for you, as I go on here, is if you have some legends, some other legends that you think we live with, by all means, type them in to the comments or the chat line, and I'll mention some of them. But I think that for us, dealing with the legends and discerning the legends from the facts is a big problem. And I think the reason is that we all perform under a great deal of pressure. We have clients that are making demands. We have budgets we have to meet. We have scheduled deadlines that are often unreasonable. And so we try to find solutions that can solve our problems without really having enough time or evidence to judge whether or not they work. So in the book, Doug Lynch provides a solution which is focused on becoming better researchers. How do we begin to use facts to make decisions instead of relying on what become the legends of our industry? So I'll offer you a couple things, and said if you're interested, type in some other legends that you live with in your jobs, and I'll mention them as they come up. So if we're going to conduct better research, there are a couple things we need to do to be most effective. One is be really clear about a goal. What is it that we're actually trying to learn? And how can we describe it in a way that everyone involved will understand what it is? Second is try to pick a methodology that works. And different goals will demand different methodologies. If our goal is to provide context and insight, so some understanding of how something might work inside of an organization, then qualitative research, the kind of research that Center for Creative Leadership did, is probably fine. If we're trying to determine effectiveness, we need to be a lot more quantitative. And if we're trying to make sure that we can do something successfully in our organization and replicate an experience that either someone else has had somewhere other than our company, or to repeat something we did in our company, probably we need a combination of both. Now, then the last thing, and I think this is something that's challenging for us sometimes, is we have to establish a framework for dealing with the data we get. And there are three things there that I think are really important. One of them is to set goals or thresholds before looking at the data. I know that I have been in a situation where I got the data and I then tried to figure out, okay, what goal can I deliver through this data? The second is to be realistic about the impacts and implications of the decisions that we make based on that data. And the last one is the hardest of all, which is be willing to accept failure and move on, meaning we thought something would work, it turned out it didn't work, and we should be willing to accept that and try to do something different. Now, one of the questions that people raise at this point is, do I really have time to do this kind of research in organizations? And my answer is yes, because I'm not saying that everything has to be a big, formal research study that has lots and lots of subject and lots of data and necessarily complex and long. But I think what is important is for us to take some time to figure out what we're trying to do and then be systematic about figuring out the degree to which it's likely to be successful. Will a new technology work? Will a different approach to design work? Will substituting on-the-job experience for some classroom learning be as effective or more effective? I think questions like that. And I think that we sometimes forget that a little bit of time in the beginning will get us bigger results in the end. Now, the other thing that is a challenge that we have to work on is making better decisions based on what I call OPAR, other people's alleged research. And what I mean by that is we've all spoken with people who said, this program works, this solution is better, this technology is faster, this technology will save us money. They make all kinds of claims, and I think that we have to become better at pushing a little bit on what people tell us. And I think there are some rules for that and some standards to which we can hold ourselves and others around us for ensuring that we are certain that what people are saying to us, they can back up. So the first thing is question everything. When someone makes a claim, ask as many questions as you can about it. Ask for, and I emphasize ask, but I parentheses here, demand quantitative data. Don't take people's word for their claims. Ask them for evidence that they can deliver the things they claim they can deliver. Third, and I think this one is really important, don't underestimate the importance of context. I stopped a few years ago using the word best practices, and I substituted instead the phrase effective practices, because best practices are so contextual. They work in an organization to solve a particular problem in a particular environment with a certain set of factors that surround it. And I think that learning solutions, and lots of solutions, are exactly the same way. You have to understand the environment in which the research that our vendors have done occurred, so you can determine the degree to which it's applicable in your context. And the last thing is be realistic. Go in with your eyes open and have that dose of suspicion, the little bit of cynicism that causes you to poke around at things that don't seem like they could be true, because usually if it's too good to be true, it is. And then the last thing I'll add here, which is trust your gut. I know I've been in situations, and I've watched other people where they listen to everything and it all sounds wonderful, and you say, there's something about this that bothers me. And when that little voice is telling you there's something wrong here, more often than not, there probably is. And so I would encourage you to listen to your intuition, that inner voice that's telling you to be suspicious. And then the last one, which I think is the hardest one, is we have to learn to never be afraid to walk away. Meaning that you have a solution, it looks really interesting, but you just don't think it's going to work. And even though your team may be disappointed, your client may be disappointed, if you don't believe that it's likely to be successful, not doing it is often the better choice. So there's a question from someone, which I'll take now. It's a good point. When the research becomes more complicated and we fail to find out a solution, then what do we do at that point? And I think that so basically, when things get out of hand, how do we step back? And I think I used to describe this thing called the Ben-Hur complex. For those of you that are, I don't know, maybe in your 40s or 50s, there was a movie Ben-Hur which had a cast of thousands, and it was this big, complicated film that took a long time to make. And I think sometimes we try to do experiments, and they suddenly get out of control. There are too many people involved, too many variables, too many people have to participate. And I think when we feel like that's happening, it's worthwhile to pause and ask yourself the question, what am I really trying to find out here? What was the original question I had? What's the most important thing I can learn from this? And then pare it down to the essential components. Because otherwise you wind up doing all kinds of work and never really getting the conclusion that you want. So to move on again just quickly and say a couple more things about this. And this is sort of what I credit Robert Rule for. Okay, when the legend becomes the fact, recognize the legend for what it is and act on the facts. And I think that the more we do that, the better. So another question about peer pressure, and I know that one's really tough. Anyone who was a child, we all probably were children at some point, or anyone that has children, you know how hard it is to do it. And I think that oftentimes the people who don't go along with the crowd become more respected than the people who do. So while taking the time to point out why things that people are claiming as facts are in fact legends, why results that people are claiming they're getting, they're not really getting, in a professional, compassionate, collaborative way, pointing that out, I think, is a really good role for us to play. And that's true with our colleagues, our learning and development colleagues, but also with our business colleagues. I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the worst things that we experience is our bosses or our executives ride on airplanes with people that tell them stories. And then the boss comes back and says, boy, I talked to this guy on the plane the other day, and we need to do that. And the easy solution there is to say, yes, boss, and go do it. The much harder one, and the one that I think this question is getting to, is to have the courage to say, I know that's what he said or she said. Let me explain what the actual facts are associated with that and why we've chosen not to make that decision. At least you can make a start. So the idea here about myth and reality, or legends and facts, is that as we go to conferences and we read articles and we listen to pundits and we see presentations and we do all those things, we're in the position to make judgments about what will work in our organizations. And I think being able to think about the difference between legend and fact, and understanding where they come from and how they work, and what we can do to help shift more away from the legend and more towards the fact, I think, is the value of the chapter that Doug Lynch wrote in More Lies About Learning. And I encourage you to read that chapter because he has a whole lot more about, in much more detail, about the notion of research and creating an interesting idea that we've spoken about in other places about building a research standard. So could we employ in our industry a standard of research that everyone would abide by, so that as we're communicating with each other, we can be certain that the process by which we've come to conclusions is one that is acceptable from a methodological standpoint. So I'm looking for another question here. Yeah, it's actually a great suggestion. When we find things that aren't working the way we expect them to work, the first step is to try to stop them. The second step is to look for another solution that could yield the results you're trying to get. So I'm not advocating stopping. I'm advocating pausing to reflect and then changing your course of action to one that's more likely to yield the result that you hope you're going to achieve. So the next lie, which is not disconnected from the first, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, is lies about learning technology. And I'm going to go back to the poll and ask you a couple of the questions here. So first, time to be really honest. No legends or myths, just the truth. I have adopted a learning technology that did not achieve the results I expected or I promised. So first option is proudly, probably more than once. Yes, but I don't admit it in public, and we won't really know you're admitting it here. Maybe I've done it, but I don't really know if I didn't investigate, and the answer is never. I've never done that. So keep poking in those answers. We're up to about 30%. Based on the way you're responding, if I answered this question, I'd probably answer the same way a large portion of the audience is in fact answering. No surprises there. Since the results are so overwhelming, I'm going to skip to the results and kind of show you what you get. Overwhelmingly, more than half of you have done it proudly. And I think it's not uncommon. I think many of us are faced with situations and we act on them because we think that's the best solution for solving the problems that we face. The next question, though, might be an explanation for that. How many of you have felt pressure to adopt new technologies even though you weren't really convinced of their value? So peers, your clients, your managers pressure you to do technology that you're just not convinced about. So we're getting pretty good responses here. Let's see. Wait for a few more responses, and I'll show you. Once again, no surprise. Overwhelmingly, we sometimes feel that pressure, and we sometimes have to act on that pressure. And I'm right there with you. I understand. I've done it myself. So I'm going to go back to something that comes from around 1982. I was working at that point doing very early computer-based training and was going to conferences and speaking and things. And I did this diagram, and what's funny about it is this was written before PowerPoint existed. So we had to like draw those arrows by hand. It's really funny to see this now. But I call this cycle of failure because it tracked what we had witnessed in education for a fairly long time. There's some new technological development. We try to retrofit this technology to our instructional environments. We bought stuff, technology, tools, software. Well, there really wasn't much software then, but you know what I mean. We designed or bought pretty poorly designed and ineffective instructional materials. We never got the results we hoped for, and went back to doing it the way we used to do it. And you know, example I use for this is I went back to school in 8th grade, and suddenly there were instructions with these televisions everywhere. Literally every classroom had a big TV, and what we discovered in that process, in my particular case, was my science teacher, Mr. Strackmine, who was almost the most boring person on earth, was even more boring on video. I mean, he was deadly in the classroom. I don't know how he survived him on video. And so by about the middle of the year, all those TVs were big bulletin boards. We would literally paste things on them. But you can think of the other examples that you've experienced in your lifetime. Educational television, like webinars, we're going to just revolutionize everything. Second Life, mobile, MOOCs, and the statement people made, and I wrote about this a few years ago, I found this in magazine after magazine, fill in the technology, and it would revolutionize either public or corporate education as we knew it, or know it, and in no case was that ever the case. And the closest I could come would be to say the Internet. And the Internet was fundamentally different than all of these technologies, in my opinion. No question the Internet has revolutionized education. But these are more applications of the Internet, and they never worked. And the reason most of them have not worked, at least not worked as we thought, was because of this concept called an affordance. And while I don't like to read screens, I will read this one. The qualities or properties of an object that define its possible uses or make clear how it can or should be used. So what are the qualities or properties of a new learning technology, and how do those influence its possible uses or how it can or should be used? And I think if we think about the affordances of the various technologies that we've adopted, we might say to ourselves, they might not be what we thought they would be. So in our environment, in learning and development, there are really sort of a set of interacting or interlacing affordances that we have to consider. First, we have to look at the affordances for the business, so the clients that we're trying to serve. Second, we have to look at is the affordances for the designer. And finally, and perhaps most important, what are the affordances for the learner? So let's look at a few of what they are. Someone here, by the way, made a comment about technology he was pressured to adopt, which was Facebook. We've probably all been there, and it's a question of how valuable that is at this point. But that's probably another webinar altogether. So when we think about affordances for the business, really what we're looking at there is effectiveness and or efficiency. So can we develop, deliver, measure, or manage learning more effectively or efficiently because of this technology? That's one thing we should have to look at. And the second thing we have to look at is, does it somehow improve the process for learning? Once again, for our clients. Does it make learning more manageable? Is it more responsive, meaning can they get what they need more quickly? Less costly, more enterprise ready, more adaptable, more learner adaptive? In what ways does that technology enable the business to deliver on its results more effectively because of what we're doing? I think in a lot of cases, this is something that we really had not considered. Now, something that we have thought about more, perhaps, actually, as I said, does it yield more quantifiable benefits to the organization? We have thought more about designers. And so the first thing we tend to look at is it make the design process better? Can we get it done faster? Is it more flexible? Can we react to feedback we're getting about our learning products and get them, fix them more quickly? Second, are the products better? Are they more reusable? So a technology that sort of came and went with this idea of learning objects and learning content management systems that we've never seemed to really find a way to execute on appropriately. Are they more user-friendly? Can we share them in different ways? All good questions and things I think that we strive for on a regular basis. And finally, learners, the most important. And notice I didn't highlight any of the words here because I think each one of these is critical in and of itself. Okay, will this technology increase engagement, motivation, or commitment? Okay, will learners interact more effectively? Will they commit more to the learning experience because of what this technology can offer? Can we get there faster? Can we make it easier for them? Can we go deeper into content than we might have been able to before? Can we make it more rigorous? Can we make it harder, but can they learn better? And finally, does it allow them to carry it with them? You'll notice the idea of mobile showing up here. Important. Can it serve multiple purposes? Can it be for learning? Can it be for reference? Can it provide performance support? Can it connect them to mentors? All things that we think about on a regular basis. And then it says, okay, so what do we do? So if we say that we're trying to measure affordances for the business, for developers and designers and for learners, then what do we do? And so I'm going to argue that we can take some time when we learn about a new technology or we are getting pressured to adopt whatever the new shiny object is, that we take some time to evaluate its affordances. And we did this once in a workshop, and it was really interesting to watch people sit and just spend a half hour talking about the affordances of a variety of technologies and how they might deploy them based on what that experience got for them. So take some time, then figure out what stakeholders group might help. So sit in a room, literally or virtually, and ask questions. What are the affordances of this technology for those three key stakeholder groups? And how can that help us deliver solutions more effectively or efficiently? And then do some experiments. Ask some questions. Try something. See if it works. And then make a kind of a thoughtful, reasoned decision about next steps. Now, the question you might ask is, what does this one have to do with the first? What's the connection between research and affordances? And I think this is how it works. Right? Something that I think that we could do a better job of, all of us, probably in many professions, but in the learning and development space in particular, is connecting the different aspects of our jobs. So we see new technologies, and we want to figure out what they can be helpful, what problems they can be helpful in solving. We know that we need to do a better job of research. There are methodologies that can both longer and more quick methodologies that can help us learn. We can begin to do little experiments on technologies to see whether or not they make a difference. And I can give you an example of something I did a couple of years ago that is illustrative. So one of the things that we get a lot of pressure for, and I wish there was an instant polling thing here, but there's not, is gamification. Go to any conference, read any journal, and everyone will tell you that gamification will revolutionize public and corporate education as we know it. And there are a bunch of us who said, maybe not. Let's find out. And so we just did a really simple experiment. We got a very well-designed game on negotiating skills. And we found 20 or 25 people from the company I worked for at that point to take it. And it was quick and dirty. Go take this course. And we looked at things like how long they spent, how many finished, how they did on any of the quizzes or things that were inside of it. And most importantly, we interviewed them all. And we asked them about 3 or 4 or 5 pretty simple questions. What did you think? How did you like it? Did you enjoy the gaming aspect of it? Would you take another one? I mean, I'm simplifying this. But the whole thing took a couple weeks. And what we learned was with the audience we went to for this particular content, pretty much what you might expect. Half the people liked it. People who kind of were into games really enjoyed the gaming part. The people who didn't like games hated the experience, didn't want to do it, didn't get through the content, kind of spent the time they spent because they felt like they were obligated to do it because someone asked them to, and the company I worked in was pretty good about kind of doing what they were told. And it turns out that confirmed other research which people had done, which said that for people who like games, it improves the learning experience, does not necessarily improve their performance, but they enjoy it more. And for people who don't like games, it actually negatively influences their performance. So while it may be that the universe tells us that gaming is critical and you have to use it if you're going to design any kind of effective learning experience for whatever generation you're designing for, a little experiment told us not so fast. And so rather than wholesale move to games, we began to take another look at it and say, okay, where would gaming be useful? What types of problems would it particularly adept at solving, and how can we use it as one of the tools we have to solve our problems? And like I said, it wasn't big. It didn't cost a lot of money. It didn't take a long time. But it helped us kind of figure out what the right thing to do when we were getting pressure from one group of people to do something and at the same time, intuitively, we weren't sure what the right answer was. So that's a good example. Now, so I have a question here about, it's a great question, and I'm afraid I'm going to answer it by saying I don't know, but we'll see if I get there when I read the question out. Sometimes we're trying to make a decision, and we're confused about what to do, and we don't have a best solution. So how do we know which one's best? How do we know what the right choice is? And my response to that question, I do encounter that a lot in a lot of what I do, is that usually the best solution is the one that gets you closest to the outcome we're trying to achieve and has the least known negative side effects. So it's kind of you have to look at the unanticipated consequences and try to figure out what they might be and gauge them. With big decisions, that's a lot harder. With little decisions, it's easier. But someone used to tell me when I was younger that you do a list of pros and cons, literally, write out. What are the benefits of the solution? What are the negative aspects of the solution? And based on that, you kind of judge, given the context you're working in and the goals you have and the constraints you're working under and the clients you're trying to serve, what's likely to lead to the best outcome. And sometimes that's really hard to do. But I suppose that's why we're in the jobs we're in. Now, getting to the end here, it's kind of simple, which is that in the end, no matter what we're trying to do here, we always need to confirm efficacy. What's the likelihood that this is going to work? Simple, but that's what we're trying to do. And then be able to provide evidence that that's the case. You can look at other chapters in the book and read about ROI as evidence or other things as evidence. But when you tell someone, I'm doing this because I think it'll be successful, here's the evidence I have for that, it's a much better position than saying, well, I'm doing it because I think this looks like the right thing to do. And it's even more important when you're saying, I think it's the wrong thing to do, and here's the evidence why, and here's what I recommend we do as an alternative. I think if there's one thing that people in our profession have to be really good at, it's not saying no, it's saying no but, or no and. I can't do what you wanted. I can't adopt that technology. I'm not going to do what you asked. But I have two other options that might wind up getting the result you want, but in a slightly different fashion. And finally, and the title of this webinar is Lies About Learning, and it ends with this, which is the hardest thing to do in a lot of settings is tell the truth. And if we get no further than just simply being able to do that, being able to say, I know that's what the press says. I know that's what the consultants have said. I know that's what you heard on the plane from the person you sat next to. It's actually not the way things work. And here's what will really happen if we try that. Now I'm sort of moving to the question section, but I do have one that's another really interesting question, which is, how does fear affect our decision power, and how do we get rid of it? And boy, that would be the next book, I think. But in the workplace, I think very often the challenge we face is that people who don't understand what we do have unreasonable expectations about the things we can deliver. And this notion of fear of saying no is something that I think we've all encountered probably throughout our careers. And I think that you don't overcome the fear. I think, in fact, the fear is healthy because the fear sometimes pushes you to think more creatively than you might have otherwise. I think the thing we do have to overcome is this, which is having the courage to actually tell the truth. To be clear about what's possible and what's not possible. To be clear about what is real and what isn't real. And to come prepared to discuss alternatives when the choice you're recommending isn't the popular choice or the choice that's become the common wisdom in our industry. I think that's really the tough one. Being able to look people in the face and say, I know that's what you want, and I have really good reasons why I think that's not the right choice. So I have a question here about sort of how to improve learning. And the question was, is train, do, reflect, learn, do really all there is? And so the question is, does taking notes help? And I think that in a lot of ways, the way each person, over again, okay, we're all individuals. There's a way the brain works, and there's lots and lots of research on neuroscience now that suggests that things that happen in the way we process information, the way that influence our behavior are pretty consistent across people. That said, I've heard people say that when I take notes, I learn more. There was actually research done recently, and it was comparing people who take notes in a class online versus people that wrote them. I think the second version of that was people who took notes online and then transposed them by hand. I found that the people who wrote them learned more than the people who just took notes blindly in a class, because there's something that connects the hand to the brain, and as you're writing it, you're thinking about it, as opposed to when you're typing, you're just frantically trying to write down something everyone says. So I think that my guess is that there's many different ways to learn as there are people, but I suggest that looking at early research on this, go look at Robert Gagne, who kind of invented this field, and see what he says about it. He has conditions for learning, and most instructional design, whether you subscribe to that theory or not, subscribe to the idea that you tell people what they're supposed to learn. You prepare them for it. You give them information. You give them content. You allow them to practice it. You give them feedback. The school of learn by doing, Roger Shank's notion. It's just constant practice and feedback. So I think it's more about exploring what the options are and finding the ones that work for you. Somebody asks, have the process we use for doing design, like ADDIE and Lean and Agile and SAM, been researched? I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know a contemporary answer to the question. I know that a while ago there was research done on something like 160 different instructional design models, and the results were they're all roughly speaking the same. They all do most of the same things, but I think that's the notion of analysis and design, and sort of what ADDIE represents, is so commonplace across multiple disciplines and professions. It's similar in software development, although as you mentioned, Lean and Agile have come up and they're doing more to change that. I don't know if there's actually been research that says one approach to design yields a better result than another approach to design. I think the question that has been researched extensively is, does an approach to design work better than no approach to design? And the answer overwhelmingly for that was yes. People who apply design methodology deliver more effective instruction than people who don't. And that's gone on for years, and every time we do that research, any other questions before we're done? Well, if not, thank you. Actually, I think Lindsay, do you want to end, or shall I?
Sure. Actually, I think I see one more question that just came in. Do you want to take a look at that one real quick?
Sure. So the question is, when there's so much coming in, when I have so many resources, and I'm not sure which ones to go to, where do I go? I think that's when your colleagues are most beneficial. Find other people and talk to them about it. You can do an internet search. You can look at some of the online support tools, but find someone else in your profession who may have faced a similar question, and ask them. And I think those will probably be the best source of assistance for trying to figure out where to focus your time. And one last question, kind of summarize what you learned during this presentation. I can't summarize what you learned, but I can kind of summarize what my goal was. And that is to say that we will all be better. We will be able to deliver better learning solutions to our clients if we become better researchers, so we can tell the difference between the legends and myths that are perpetrated in our profession and the truths in our profession. That we, rather than decide based on what we hear, make decisions based on hard data and evidence that a conclusion that someone has drawn works, and that we apply that methodology for figuring out with new technologies what their affordances are, how they support more effective delivery and solution design across our businesses, our developers, and our learners, and make decisions about technology based on a better understanding of their affordances, rather than based on the hype that gets created in the market when they're created. Basically about becoming better researchers.
All right, perfect closing statement, Larry. I think that sums it up perfectly. And thank you to everyone for participating today. Thank you for your time. Again, if you have additional questions or you want to keep the conversation going, we are on Twitter. You can keep the conversation going with #PluralsightLive. If you have questions for us, additional feedback, you can email us at webinars@pluralsightlive, webinars@pluralsight.com. Again, this webinar was recorded. We'll email the link in a few days. And when you leave today, please fill out our survey. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
I would offer, before people go, if you want to send me a question, Larry-Israelite@pluralsight.com. I love talking about this stuff. I'd be happy to chat with you.